Still sticking with the theme of energy, cooking gas. Despite, of course, the Nigerian government's removal of 7.5% value-added tax on liquefied petroleum gas in December, we're still looking at prices year on year. Now, this is as at December 2024 from the Bureau of Statistics. So 7,177, that's for a 5 kg cylinder, 44% increase year on year compared to December of 2023. Month on month, 1.2% increase. It did decline for the 12 kg cylinder. That's at 17,274. Again, this is as of December of 2024. 50% year-on-year rise, decline 0.05% month-on-month. So let's talk cooking gas with Dr. Yinka Opeke, who's the CEO of Smart Energies, joining us to discuss. Good morning to you. Great to have you in the studio.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So you're in this sector. You're doing a lot of advocacy, trying to help people out with cooking gas and so on. What do you think? What's the triggers as far as what you're observing in terms of the prices being elevated?
Okay, so for starters, I would like to say Happy International Women's Day to all my women, International Women's Month, to all our courageous, resilient women out there that are doing great things to make the environment better for each and every one of us. So yes, so back to this question that we hear all the time. So there are different factors, to be honest, and I would only speak to the ones that, I'm quite familiar with. So there's just that typical thing of demand and supply. When the price of commodity, when there's more demand and then there's issues around supply, then the prices go up. So because of the issues around the awareness at the global scale and at the national scale, when you're talking about the climate change issues and talking about locally in Nigeria, talking about making gas the transition fail, there's been a lot of awareness about it at the government level and even at the private sector level, like companies like ours. So by virtue of that, quite a number of people have decided the importance of transitioning to cleaner cooking from the environmental perspective and also from the health perspective. So there's also that issues around increased demand. So that would affect it. The other thing that I would think about again is issues around the supply, not commensurate with the demand. Okay. Because fine, we have heard that NLNG is domesticating all their production, about 450,000 metric tons is what we have heard, So there's a lot of data out there, some of them, they're not empirical evidence to say that, this is exactly what it is, but that's what is out there. And then based on demand and then issues around pipeline vandalization, because you know that when you are also producing oil, the associated gas is what we're trying to process to LPG and other forms of gases. Right. So now there's no commensurate supply in terms of, so that is also another issue. There'll be issues around inflation. There's inflation on every commodity. So now Nigeria Bureau of Statistics is saying that, that National Bureau of Statistics is saying that as of February, inflation was about 23.1 or something. Right, yeah. But when I look at it in practical terms, I would differ because if I think about the price of bread as of 2 years ago, a typical loaf would be about 500 naira, but now it goes for about 2,000 naira. Right. So for me, it's like 40%. So when you look at the cost of inflation, that is also a factor. Another factor could be the ones that we're importing, the associated cost of importation and FX is also there. So while government may have removed VAT on gas and certain other things, the implementation is one thing that I cannot speak to, whether it's there, because sometimes we import some of our cylinders, and even though they said that there's we have tax-free on certain things, they'll tell you that, they haven't updated it on the system. So the point is, are you implementing that? But in addition to that, there's so many other factors that affect the prices. Fantastic.
Thank you for that. So the Bureau of Statistics had a residential energy demand side survey, and I think they found that only about 19% of the population is using cooking gas. So there's still a bit of a gap, and I'm guessing, in your view, the price is contributing to that. How do we scale this? How do we get more people to use LPG?
Okay, good question. So I'll speak to partly to what we do and what other organizations and the government sector can do. Yeah. So we do a lot of focus on the rural communities. Again, because when you're talking about domestic utilization of cooking gas, it's really at the rural community, because these are people who are living on less than $2 a day. So for you to even make them transition, so the issue is really on that transition. You and I are probably using gas already, and then the issues are around, are you sure you're not using an expired cylinder, or are you using a 12.5 kg or 25? But those who are using firewood, kerosene and charcoal, most of them, the major barrier to transition is the initial cost of that cylinder. But the moment you're able to give them that starter kit of the cylinder, the burner regulator, whatever size you're giving them, it's kind of easier for them to refill 1 kg, 2 kg, 3 kg, because typically that would be the income they would have used to get the firewood, the kerosene, and the charcoal. So part of what we can do, if we are targeting the grassroots, because that's what we are doing at the global scale, at the national scale, we do a lot of collaborations with the local government, local government, state governments, and federal governments, and organized private sector who are willing to play in this whole sustainability space. So what we do in Smart Energies hinges around SDG 7 and 13, and even 5 that talks about gender equality, because when you're talking about cooking, it's really the women, right? And when we go to those communities, when they tell you the amount of time it takes them to go to the forest, to borrow the machine they'll use to cut down the trees, and bring it back to the road and get a keke or whatever it is to bring it to their communities, the time poverty, at least 5 hours, 6 hours.
Wow.
A lot of them, the second issue again is the issues around culture and habits. They're just used to it. That's what they were born into. That's what my mom used to use, and there's a myth around I need to use firewood. So a lot of advocacy has to go into that. So back to my point, a lot of training, advocacy, awareness has to happen, and a lot has to come from the government sector, because they are the regulatory agency when it comes to energy and things along those lines. And then collaboration with the private sector players like us to continue to look for ways where we can, continue to promote it. And at the grassroots is mostly, when you use it as a palliative, it's easier. Just the same way you see a lot of people giving out rice, giving out sewing machines, giving out, all those things can also be given out, because a typical cylinder will last for about 15 years.
Okay.
So there's issues around them not even knowing when the cylinder is expired. So a lot has not really gone into the education of domestic utilization of cooking gas. So that would also help.
What about what kind of, are you across the country?
Absolutely.
Or are you, yeah?
Yes, absolutely, we do that. So we're known for that. So it's really about us identifying who the financiers are, because these cylinders, yes. Absolutely, because it's expensive. Exactly, it's very expensive.
Right. Okay. So how are you seeing that working out?
So the truth is, corporate social responsibility will always be an integral part of a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere. But of course, you will not rely only on that, because for me, I think one of the things we do as a company is identify the low-hanging fruits. Because when I start thinking about the bureaucracy and the complexity of doing business in Nigeria, trust me, if you start thinking about all of that, you're not going to get anything done.
Right.
But like I said, it's just really about me coming to you and saying, oh, this is what you do in your company. Have you considered doing anything in the energy space? This is what we do as a company. We always go to communities, identify rural areas where they need to transition to cleaner cooking, and you have those conversations. Those who align with it, it's an easy sell.
Yeah.
And then you now decide. Most of them, they say who pays the piper dictates the tune.
Right.
So if you go and meet a bank, for example, they would want to do the intervention in communities they have branches, or communities they intend to have branches. If you go and meet a local government chairman, he wants to do it in his community. If you go and meet a senator or an honorable, they want to do it in their constituency. So usually they know the areas they want to do those interventions, because they are already doing interventions in those areas anyways.
Yeah.
So we kind of try to just connect the dots, right? Because a friend of mine would say that everything humanity needs is in the hands of one person or the other. So we sit down there to say, okay, these guys would transition, but they don't have the money. Who has the finances to help them? So that is one of the ways that has been tested and trusted for us to, to work. So aside from that, people like you and I, like I said, there's a lot of awareness in terms of even damaged cylinders. When you talk about issues around explosion, misuse, I say, whether it's a cylinder, whether it's an air conditioner, whether it's anything, if you don't practice the right safety measures, there are still dangers around it. But a lot of our focus is on the grassroots transition.
Okay, so, in the prior segment, I was looking at Indonesia and how the president there wants to feed all the pregnant women and all the children. And Indonesia has 200 million people, right? This bill is coming out to $28 billion a year. And the investors there are worried about the sustainability of Indonesia being able to feed all pregnant women and children, right? I don't know how, I'm sorry, I'm not want to deviate here, but the family planning side of this, I don't know how many of these families you've gone to see personally when you're delivering the gas. But one of the challenges I found with sustainability is that you're trying as much as you can to provide amenities to feed families. But some of these families are really big, all right? They've got lots of children, they are growing and growing, and so the cooking gas can only last so long, right? So isn't this a holistic thing where you're trying to keep families at a, because of the consumption and all this. So I'm talking about all the other factors that go around sustainability and advocacy. Have you ever, is that something that you talk about with your team?
That's why you have to decide where you want to play in all of this. So it's a huge value chain, I keep saying it.
Yeah.
I look at it as a national cake.
Right.
Decide the piece of the pie you want to focus on.
That cake is shrinking. There's not enough yeast sugar to cook the cake.
I go to bed at night knowing fully well that I have done the very best I want to do as a company.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, a friend of mine would say, if you want to be everything to everybody, you want to be El Shaddai, you shall die. Something like that. So we have identified a niche whereby, see, sometimes when we go for those advocacies, you see all those women, before you even know it, Mrs. Smart Energy, they'll give me a peck on the cheek.
Right.
What we do at the grassroots has become the most rewarding part of the solutions we give at Smart Energies.
Yeah.
So again, back to what you said, I think for us, it's not just really about giving them the cylinder. Some people will say, oh, how would they refill it? Who will give them the money?
That was my follow-up question.
To be honest, you can't be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, a lot of them are doing petty trade. A lot of them, the firewood also comes at a cost. The kerosene comes at a cost.
Yeah.
So if we have, it's almost like saying that, so I can't be magnanimous enough to get you a cylinder that would typically cost you 31,000 naira. And you're telling me to give you 2,000 naira and 1,000 naira to, I think a lot of the challenges for most of these women that we have interfaced with, a lot of them are in urban centers. When you go and meet some financiers, they feel like, oh, in the remote areas, how would they get gas? I'm telling you that your office here, less than 2 kilometers from even 1 kilometer, I'll tell you people who are using firewood in urban centers.
Yeah.
So sometimes there are some remote areas that are extremely remote that are not yet ready for the intervention because the infrastructure is not there.
Right.
So there are no gas plants there, there are no retailer locations there are no people who are selling accessories there. There are issues around all of that. But quite a number of them are in peri-urban, urban centers as well. Right.
Well, okay. You see now you see now you're bringing out more questions. Arise News was invited to a conversation with one of the telcos, right? And we sat down with the CEO. We're talking about, and I asked the CEO about the rural areas and whether the profits they get from the urban areas subsidize the rural. And he said yes, because the ability to pay for data and all these things, it's just not. What's your long-term view of rural Nigeria? Is rural Nigeria just forever going to be this case where we continue to where they just need support? Or can we grow? Because this was somebody asked me, can Nigeria ever have the type of inclusive economic growth to where wealth passes through to the rural sector and we no longer have these conversations about trying to help them out? Because you see where I'm going?
Absolutely. So I would think, again, that's the responsibility of the leadership.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Because they control everything, So leadership policies, for example, I would say in the US, for example, I'm sure you have heard about things around food stamps.
Of course.
And you know how food stamps really helps the average person, because what they're trying to do is to close the inequality gap, which is something far from what is happening in Nigeria. So based on the policies and regulations, because trust me, even if we had more friendlier policies, it's very ironic that on my way here, I was just coming from one of the government agencies. I would not mention them just for the sake of this. And in less than a month, they have closed down our office 3 times. Based on misinformation. And I was at their office today to meet a more senior director. When you go to these agencies, there's some of them that you meet more reasonable people than others. Right. And I was lucky to meet a reasonable person today. And the question I asked is, are you going to be happy if you ground this business?
Right.
Is that really your focus?
Because there's an impact.
I'm just trying to say that because if the environment is enabling for private sector players, more will be done.
And the rural sector
will be able,
can grow.
That's really where I'm getting to. Because there are issues around overregulation, there are issues around, you come and close us up. What is the notice that you're yesterday we had to ask, what are you closing up for today?
Oh, this happened yesterday?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
And so the environment is quite hostile. So sometimes when they're saying that, and there are a lot of people who are willing to do legit business in Nigeria, but the environment is not conducive. They're held back because the more money I make, the more I can hire, the more there's employment out there, the more, and it's a ripple effect.
And then your advocacy can now spread out and impact more.
Exactly. So the private sector, we have what we can do, but the public sector also has to make it easier for us, you know. And you're saying that you want to promote energy transition, you want to make gas the transition fuel, everything around that, you must make it easy for players to come and invest.
Right.
So if, for example, now I go to local government, for example, in Niger State, and we give away 3,000 cylinders, automatically we have increased the demand for gas. But are there private sector players who are willing to put their money there to go and establish gas plants? I don't want to establish gas plants all over the country. Exactly. It's not part of my, I love the soft life, by the way, so, but that's just an enlightened note. But I'm just trying to say that it's not making it attractive for private sector players to come, because the more money the system makes, the more you can impact it. But overall, it's the leadership when you talk about that.
Fantastic conversation. Yes. Well said. Dr. Yinka Opeke, CEO of Smart Energies, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Really appreciate it.